Hi, Dr. Mazza, and welcome to OCD Whisperer Podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So you're an incredible colleague of mine in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm super excited that you're here with me today. One of the things I know is that you have a book out, also Acceptance Commitment Therapy for OCD. So I thought, who better to ask questions about sticky thoughts, right? So I think some things that I wanted to ask you, because this is something that I see quite often and people have questions or get stuck on, is, the whole concept, we don't have to believe everything we think, but with OCD brains, some thoughts get really stuck. They're obsessive, they're repetitive, they're intrusive. And there's this whole kind of cognitive process that goes along with that. And so I wanted to ask you, what are some common things that maybe you've seen, like how people maybe overly attached to their thoughts, or maybe what kind of things they end up telling themselves or rationalizing in terms of what really continues that cycle?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really great question and something I commonly work on with folks. And so, I just want to start out by saying that it's fairly normal for us to get stuck on thoughts. Like it's kind of, when thoughts first come into our mind, it's just initially there. We're initially bought into them. We initially believe them. And so I think actually the first step is sort of slowing down and really notice, what is the thought, and is focusing on that thought helpful, right? And the reason why that might be important is because the more we focus on our thoughts, the more we buy them and believe them, the more control they have over what we do and how we live. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm able to sort of slow down and notice what my mind is saying right now, I can then sort of get curious about that and say, like, is this a thought that I want to continue to focus on? Will it be helpful in terms of being present in my life, in terms of helping me in my relationships, in terms of me getting my work done? And if it will, great. Maybe that's a thought I do want to buy and believe and get stuck on. But if this is a thought that's going to sort of take me into a rabbit hole and maybe pull me further away from being present and doing what really matters to me, then maybe that's when I want to learn how to let it go.
Yeah, when you say rabbit hole, because I think I know what that means, but just to make sure that, whoever's listening to this, they understand what that means. We're talking about probably some of that compulsive analysis or that incessant questioning, like what the thought means. What does it mean about me? Is it true? Or what if this happens in the future? Oh my gosh, I have to do something about it. I have to figure it out. I have to get to the bottom of this.
Exactly. Right. There's that, sometimes I call it like a mental game of ping pong. Mm-hmm. Is the thought right or wrong? Is it a real thought? Is it an OCD thought? And like you said, I have to figure it out. Why am I having this thought? So there's a whole kind of mental processes that happen sometimes when these thoughts come in. And oftentimes the more that we're in here, the less present we are, mm-hmm. the less focused we are on living. And so when someone's sort of caught up on the thoughts, it can very much look like they're not present. Mm-hmm. Christy, I don't know if this happened to you, but I know for myself, like sometimes I'll be home with my husband, and when I'm stressed out, he'll say, "Where are you right now?"
Yeah.
The same experience, right? Is when we're in here, we're not fully present. We're not usually connected to the people around us, to nature, to sort of what's happening in our environment. And I actually often think that a secondary symptom of that is then feeling disconnected and lonely.
Yeah, it's funny you even said that, because I actually remembered this was years ago, but I had a friend who would notice this before even I realized what was going on. But of course, when you look back, hindsight is 2020, you totally get it all. But in the moment I didn't, but she would call it Timbuktu. She goes, "Oh my God, did you go to Timbuktu again?" And I'm like, yeah, I think I'm there, because I would completely disconnect. And so we just, like, it was a funny, cute way of naming it. but gave a immediate reference point. And so every time I'd be in, my Timbuktu is what we called it then, she kind of pointed it out, and then I'd have to really work to get out of my head and come back to being in the moment. Again, at the time, I didn't know what it was that was happening, because, for most people, you can get in your head, but then if somebody kind of points it out, you can come back and move on and kind of reconnect. And a lot of times with OCD, also, if you don't quite understand that can be an element of OCD experience, it can be really hard to come back. It can be really hard to recognize that, not all thoughts are created equal, or that, not all thinking that you're doing is actual thinking, that sometimes it's actually compulsive.
Right.
And so, differentiating between those different features is such a key component.
It can be super challenging. And I think some of the ways in which I try and help people through that is, one, by kind of awareness, right? So I often recommend having some kind of mindfulness practice. Really, that's the foundation for all of this.
Yeah.
We need to be aware that we're in our mind in order to then choose whether or not we want to do something different, right? And then, the second part is just being curious about it. Is this what I'm doing right now, is focusing on this, is ruminating, is mental checking, like, is this going to help me in the long term? Is this going to help me be present in my life? Is this going to help me? And if it's not, then the next option could be to practice something like a cognitive diffusion exercise. And I have like a whole chapter on this actually in the ACT workbook, because there's many different ways of practicing cognitive diffusion, but in a few words, what it means is basically learning how to take our thoughts not so seriously. Mm-hmm. And that can be really hard, because when these thoughts come up, especially for folks with OCD, it can be really scary and really, really painful.
Yeah.
And so practicing these exercises in a really gentle way and in different ways can then kind of demonstrate how it.
Yeah. And, even as you're saying that, so I already know 100%. Anybody listening is going to go, ooh, cognitive diffusion. What could be an example? Would you mind maybe giving us like one example of what cognitive diffusion might sound like or be like, or one tip, one strategy?
Absolutely. Is it okay if we do an experiential exercise?
Ooh, okay. On the spot. I love it. Yes.
So maybe we can just kind of sit back and close your eyes or gaze at something in front of you.
Okay.
And perhaps just thinking about a thought that kind of nags you. It could be like a thought like, I'm stupid, or I should have been better. You don't need to pick the most overwhelming thought for this exercise. Something that's perhaps a little uncomfortable, but not overwhelming.
Okay, I got it.
Okay. And so what I'd like you to do is you're going to repeat this thought to yourself several times. I'll tell you when to stop. And I'm going to ask you to notice what it feels like as you focus on this thought. And when I say what it feels like, notice where the emotion shows up in your body. Notice how powerful the emotion is. And I'll guide you through this. Okay. So go ahead and begin by just kind of repeating the thought very slowly. So for example, I'm stupid. I'm stupid. Go ahead and repeat that to yourself, and I'll tell you when to stop using your thought.
Okay. Would you like me to do it out loud or to myself quietly?
Yeah, it's up to you, whichever you prefer.
Okay. I guess since everybody's listening, we'll do it out loud. I'm going to fail. 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 I'm going to fail.
What I'd like you to do right now is to just notice what emotion is showing up in your body. Every emotion is linked to a physical sensation somewhere between our gut and our neck usually. And just on a scale scale of 0 to 10, how powerful it is right now. 0 being not powerful, 10 being the most powerful.
It kind of increased to like a 5, I'd say.
Okay. So now what I'd like you to do is a similar process, except this time you're going to add a few words in before your thought.
Okay.
I'm having the thought that I'm stupid. Or in your case, I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. And I'd like you to go ahead and repeat that slowly until I tell you to stop.
I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail.
Just noticing on a scale of 0 to 10 how powerful the emotion was that time.
Yeah, it definitely dropped.
Okay, we're gonna like what would you say?
Like a 3, 2.5, even 2, 3, somewhere in there.
Okay, and then one more time. This time we're gonna even add more in front. So I notice I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail.
Okay, I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. Yeah, I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail.
And then once again, on a scale of 0 to 10, how powerful was this experience?
Yeah, like totally just went further away. And yeah, like a 1 maybe.
Okay. So go ahead and just bring your awareness back, Christina. So that's that demonstration right there is one example. It's just one way of sort of practicing cognitive fusion. And if you notice, like the step 1 is like, I am stupid, I am going to fail, right? We're believing and buying what the mind is saying. The second step, we sort of remove ourselves just a little bit by saying, oh, I'm having a thought that. And then the third step where I'm noticing the thought that. And so this sort of helps us be a bit more step back from the thoughts to be a bit more of an observer of the thoughts rather than automatically sort of believing and buying them. And what we notice is when we are able to sort of step back and notice the thought as a thought, it frees us up to then choose, okay, what would I like to do next? Do I want to continue focusing on thought? Do I want to, refocus on, my meeting or, what my partner is saying to me or my run? Like, what is it I want to focus on?
Yeah, it's, I mean, again, this is what I do also with in terms of work, but like, experiencing it myself again, just remembering that and feeling it, right? Initially, like there was an immediate feeling of sadness and chest tightening and just like everything just getting a little bit more intensive. And the more I was repeating it, the more I was feeling like everything is just kind of covering and coming in. And then the first step of them having the thought that created enough of that space and just a little bit of distance to recognize, okay, it's a thought. And even noticing kind of where I was wanting to focus, okay, it is a thought that I'm having. And then I'm noticing exactly right. It totally brought that observer self and like completely, I felt like a disconnect. And of course, granted, this is a time where I'm not necessarily super triggered, but it is a thought that I have sometimes. I think, most people are afraid of, failing and looking like a fool, and I'm no exception, so, but definitely, right, like practicing that even now and seeing how I could bring the trigger up and then bring it down. So, I mean, absolutely, I think it's such a valuable tool. And like you said, to really practice and hone in on engaging that part of yourself that's observing the experience, observing what your brain is doing, observing the feelings that are coming up, no matter how intensive. And like you said earlier, this is why a big foundational piece is having some sort of a practice to really cultivate that skill of mindfulness and presence and being in the here and now. Yeah.
The mind is such a good salesperson.
Oh my gosh, right? I always tell people, like, don't buy your own propaganda, because
It's like such a good salesperson, and I mean, it's so good at sucking us in and really wants us to believe and buy what it has to offer. And once we notice that, we have a choice.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. That was awesome. And I hope that that's going to be helpful for folks and that people will try that strategy. But thank you so much. And I just wanted to, before we end today, ask, where can people find you if they would love to connect with you?
Sure. Our website is choicetherapy.net. So that's one place that you can certainly find me at. On Twitter, it's at Marisa T. Mazza, and on Instagram, it's Choice Therapy SF.
And the name of your book, I'd love to also make sure that people know about that.
Sure. It's the ACT workbook for OCD, and you can purchase it on Amazon if you're interested.
Beautiful. And I'll link all of that in the show notes too.
That's great, Christina. And we also offer, we just started offering some support groups as well as individual therapy. So if that's something you're interested in.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's awesome. Great to know. And thank you again for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I hope that was helpful.
Definitely. Bye.